Good evening, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm Kelly Corcoran. I'm Associate Conductor of the Nashville Symphony, and I'm very excited to be able to share with you our pre-concert discussion, where we'll be talking about this great repertoire that you're about to hear tonight, and talk a little bit about the artists involved in our program as well. So first, let me tell you a little bit. We have a guest conductor this evening, and his name is Jun Markl. This is his first time in Nashville, working with the Nashville Symphony. He has guest conducted great orchestras all around the world, originally from Germany, born of a German concertmaster, violinist father, and a Japanese mother. He's fluent, of course, in German, French, Italian, a little Japanese, English, and he was also music director of the orchestra in Lyon in France for quite some time as well. So we're very excited to have him here in Nashville conducting a program that has 2 French pieces on the program, and of course he deeply knows this repertoire from his time as a music director of a great French orchestra. Our soloist this evening, playing the Korngold Violin Concerto, is Stefan Jackiw, and he is now, this is his 3rd time in Nashville in the 6 years that I've been here. So he's a favorite to Nashville audiences. The first time he was here, he played the Beethoven Concerto, then Sibelius, I think the last time he was here, and now, of course, Korngold. He is a young violinist. I think his bio says 1985 as his date of birth, and he is a remarkable talent. I actually, when long before I came here to Nashville, I spent some time working in Boston at the New England Conservatory at a preparatory school, and at the time, he was actually a student in the prep school in Boston. So I've been hearing him play the violin since, the 90s. So it's a great pleasure to get to hear him here tonight, and he's just a remarkable violinist, and I think you're going to really enjoy his playing. Beautiful intonation, beautiful color, beautiful just command of the instrument and the sound. So we have a program tonight filled with 3 pieces that are all spectacular, that are all fantastique, I guess you could say. The Symphonie Fantastique, of course, is the last piece on our program. But we begin our program with the Messiaen, Un Sourire, a smile. And I'm not going to say too much about it because our conductor is actually going to speak about this piece in the program, and he's going to play some demos and he'll kind of talk a little bit about the piece. But essentially, Messiaen was a French composer. The work was composed, or premiered, I should say, in 1991, so somewhat recent history. In 1991 was the premiere performance of the work, and it was composed for the 200th anniversary of the birth of Mozart. Or sorry, not the birth of Mozart, the death of Mozart, excuse me. 1791, Mozart died. And so 1991 was the 200th anniversary of his death. And the title, A Smile, is kind of reflective of Mozart, despite the fact that he was ill, despite the fact that he had massive debts piling up around him, despite the fact that he had, all kinds of negativity in his life, he always had a smile, even at the end, even near this imposing death. And so this Messiaen piece is a tribute to that smile that Mozart always carried with him. The work in no way sounds like the music of Mozart. It is truly in the style and color of Messiaen. Messiaen was a very, very, very important figure in French music and in music in general of the 20th century. Some of his more important pieces include the Quartet for the End of Time, which he composed when he was a prisoner of war during the Second World War. That is a quartet that was for piano, violin, cello, and clarinet. And he wrote this quartet as a prisoner of war, and these were colleagues of his that were in prison with him, and he wrote this piece. Messiaen is known for playing with time and utilizing time in a different kind of way than many other composers. The way he plays with rhythm, the shapes of the rhythm, and the way he perceived time is very, very specific to Messiaen. Messiaen was also, I think the word, if I'm saying it right, ornithologist. He studied birds. He was a big, big studier of bird sounds, bird songs, and he would often incorporate the music from various birds into his own compositions. And not in the way that we think of with Beethoven with little pretty trills, you know, and the flutes or things like that, but in a very authentic kind of manner. So all of these things are things that you will hear in the music of Messiaen. And Messiaen, you know, I would encourage you all to dig a little deeper into his output because he was truly an important composer. People like Boulez studied composition with him. People like George Benjamin, a living English composer, many of the big composers of the latter part of the 20th century were profoundly influenced by Messiaen. So very, very interesting composer, and that's the beginning of our program tonight. Then we turn to the Korngold Violin Concerto. Now Korngold is a very, very interesting figure in music history. This concerto was premiered in 1946, I believe. And Korngold kind of had multiple lives. How many of you are familiar with the music of Korngold? A little bit, yeah. And of those of you that are familiar, would you say the film scores, maybe a little bit for some of you, maybe the symphony? So, you know, but most of all, his fame truly came, first off, as a child. He was a child prodigy. He was compared to Mozart. He was compared to Mendelssohn, to these other child prodigies. And I want to just read for you a little paragraph about Korngold to give you a little bit of perspective on what was happening for Korngold as a child. So, he was the son of a respected Viennese music critic. So a very, very prolific, important music critic that had followed in the lines of Hanslick and these other critics that had been very influential with Brahms and, you know, all of these. So he comes from, you imagine your father is a very influential music critic. Okay, that's a big deal in Vienna. So, and he was not quite 10 years old when his father took him to meet Gustav Mahler, who was so impressed by his talent that he persuaded Alexander Zemlinsky, who was the sole teacher of Schermerhorn, and himself, of course, a distinguished conductor and composer, to take on Korngold as a pupil. With Zemlinsky's help, Der Schneemann, a pantomime that Korngold composed at the age of 11, was put in shape for a production by the Vienna Opera. So he's 11 years old, and he has this work that's taken on by the Vienna Opera. Its premiere there made the boy an important figure in Europe's musical life at the ripe age of 13. So the English critic Ernst Newman compared the young Korngold with the young Mozart. Strauss, Goldberg, Puccini, Engelbert Humperdinck, they all welcomed him as their peer, and his music was performed by the likes of Mengelberg, Strauss, Kreisler, you know, all of these people, Lotte Lehmann, all of these important critical figures at the time. So imagine, here's this young boy who comes along in Vienna from the father of this, you know, or sorry, the son of this important critic. And, you know, he's 13 years old and he's, you know, by Mahler telling him you're a genius. I mean, this is unbelievable, this young boy. But Korngold, his musical voice was very romantic. It was very lush. It was very creative and individual and unique. But it was in this kind of romantic vein. Now, he comes to age at a time later on in the 20th century, when we get into coming into the 50s and even, people are starting to turn more towards atonal music, they're turning more towards 12-tone music, all these different kinds of explorations of sound. And you can imagine Korngold still writing in a very romantic style, that this is not necessarily thought of as the future of music. So Korngold goes from, as a young lad, being considered this amazing genius, revered by Mahler and Strauss and all the great giants of music, and then turning as he becomes an adult and continues to write in this romantic vein into someone that is antiquated and not contemporary and not relevant and not important and not the future of music, and really kind of discarded a little bit. Part of this also happened in the 1930s when Korngold was invited to come to Hollywood and work on a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, a film production. Mickey Rooney, I think, played Puck. I don't know if you guys know this film. And Korngold was asked to adapt the Mendelssohn score for the film. So that was his first initial trip to Hollywood. And so once he started getting associated with Warner Brothers and making all these great film scores, of course he won the Oscar for Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn, and so he was really at the top of his game in the film industry. But the classical world back in Europe, in this kind of more serious style of composing, didn't quite take this film music seriously. Korngold struggled with this through his life. Number one, he had the father who was the critic who was always judging him. And this will come with Berlioz too, the father judging, the mother judging. Think about that for those of you that have children, of course, that what a role you play in their lives. But Korngold, of course, always thinking about his father and what his father thought of him. But also kind of convincing himself that film music, writing for film was like writing for an opera, he told himself, that it was the same art, it was a musical drama, and it was at the same level and the same status as writing for film. So Korngold, of course, today, I'm a big proponent of film music. I'm a huge fan of film music, and I hope many of you are as well, because I think that there is some fantastically stunning music that has been composed for film. And for me, I don't judge something based upon, film music, non-film music. I judge something upon the worth and the value and the quality of the music. And I think we would all agree that Korngold was exceptional at composing, whether it was film music or something for the Vienna Opera or the concerto that we're going to hear tonight. But Korngold's father dies, and Korngold, I should back up for 1 second and say that, of course, the war happens. And so through all of this, Korngold decides that he's going to stay in Hollywood. He has no choice, really. His family comes, and they make their residency in Hollywood, and he commits himself to writing music for film. He writes, I think, over 20 scores for Warner Brothers. He becomes a U.S. citizen, and he really leaves behind this world in Vienna and has made his home now in the States and became a U.S. citizen. And then it's when his father dies that he realizes, I want to go back to writing this classical music as well. I don't want to leave behind this other kind of work that is such a big part of who I am. Now, he had a friend that was always asking him, hey, where's that violin concerto you're going to write for me? Where's that violin concerto you're going to write for me? Which is funny in the music world, because all of us, get those kind of suggestions all the time from our colleagues. And eventually, little by little, he was pulling music from his film scores and writing down ideas for a violin concerto. And he presented it to this friend, and just couldn't really nail him down. Couldn't get a performance on the books. Couldn't get anything on the schedule. Presented it to another friend, and this other friend said, this is way too hard. I can't play this piece. This isn't going to happen. And so, of course, he was really discouraged. And then he met Heifetz. And Heifetz heard the concerto. He played it for him, heard parts of it, and said, this isn't hard. You need to make it harder. You need to add more things to it. You need to increase the difficulty of the piece. And all of a sudden, Korngold was excited. And he was really, really, really like, all right, let's do this. And so the piece was actually premiered by the St. Louis Symphony, with Heifetz playing, and I think I said 1946, I believe, was the date of the premiere. It went on, of course, to have a great long life. Heifetz recorded it with the LA Phil, I believe, in the 50s, early 50s. And so this has gone on to become a real staple of concerto repertoire for the violin. It's a beautiful piece. What I think is stunning about it is if I wanted to have 2 hours with you guys, I could play for you this little melodic moment and how that compares to this film score, and this movement compares to this film score, because he literally took ideas from his film scores and put them in the concerto. Every melody, with the exception of one in the second movement, has been taken from a film score of his. So, it's the beautiful kind of combination of these two worlds coming together. And I had a colleague of mine, I'm a huge John Williams fan. I hope some of you are John Williams fans as well. Of course, Superman, E.T., all of these great scores. But I had some colleagues of mine after the rehearsal, they said, hey, do you like the Korngold? And I said, well, yeah, I love the Korngold. And they said, sounds like E.T., huh? And I said, yeah, a little bit, But certainly John Williams was greatly influenced by Korngold. Korngold left a huge legacy for many composers that followed him, but certainly for film music. And often, we hear Korngold and we think, oh, well, that's great film scoring. But what we don't recognize is that he is the one that established that sound. He is the one that created what we know of and think of today as great film music. it didn't exist before Korngold. He was one of the people who really established John Williams. All of these great film scores that we hear today came from Korngold. So he's a critical figure in music history and in the forward trajectory of orchestral music. I also want to point out to you guys a book that I would recommend if you want to learn some more about Korngold. There's been a real resurgence in Korngold in recent years because I think people are coming to realize that it's okay to write music with a melody. It's okay to write romantic, beautiful music. You can do it in a creative, exciting, new, individual way, you know, and Korngold was the perfect example of that. So there's been a great resurgence and interest in his music, and this is a wonderful biography. It's just, you know, Eric Korngold, and the author is Jessica Duchin. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but you're welcome to look at this afterward if anybody wants to look at it. But it's a marvelous book, and it details, you know, his operas, his time in Vienna as a child prodigy, and interacting with all these great giants of music, and then all the years in Hollywood, and then coming back to writing some of these scores later on in his life. You know, it's really interesting to me because he also, of course, has the cello concerto, and parts of that were originally used in a film. And many of you might know and remember, of course, Leonard Slatkin, who's a great friend here in Nashville. He was our music advisor for quite some time. Well, Leonard Slatkin's mother played the cello solo part in the film of the Korngold, you know, when it was originally used in the film, because his mother played in these studio orchestras in Hollywood. So, I mean, it's just kind of cool, all of these connections and these interwoven lives, you know, that we don't think of. And then here, Korngold, his father, the great critic, you know, was in the legacy of Hanslick, who was writing critiques of premieres by Brahms. You know, it's all connected. So I think that that is really interesting when you draw those connections to each other. Now, let's talk about Berlioz, because the Symphonie Fantastique is a stunning, monumental work in music history. What I think is so great about this program tonight is that each of these composers are so vitally important when you look at the spectrum of music and the impact that they made on music. And with Berlioz, I want to also draw your attention to something that I would highly recommend for all of you guys. I was just watching this today, that there's a wonderful series called Keeping Score that the San Francisco Symphony has done with Michael Tailson Thomas, and it kind of highlights various works. And there's an entire 1-hour episode on the Symphonie Fantastique, and it talks about the music and Berlioz as a child. And we'll talk about some of this tonight, but if you want to dig deeper, I would highly encourage you guys to check this out. And you can just, if you Google Berlioz Symphonie Fantastique Keeping Score, it's on PBS. You can watch the entire episode for free online on their website. So it's really, really fantastic. But Berlioz did not come, he was not a child prodigy. He did not come from a musical background. His father was a kind of physician, doctor. He wrote some very, very important documents on different ailments, and very scholarly gentleman. And so Berlioz grew up with this father figure who really did not want him to do music at all, you know. And also, I should say for a moment that the conductor tonight, he lives still in Lyon. And this is, I think he said, about 20 miles away from where Berlioz grew up and was born. So he said he takes the music of Berlioz very, very, very seriously, because this is his hometown. It's next door. I mean, this is a composer that's very, very close to his heart and who he is. So Berlioz was a young gentleman, a young lad, studying math, studying physics, studying all these things with his father, and he went to church quite often. And it was when he was at church that he was so deeply moved by music, and so touched and affected by music. And he realized that he had this passion. Passion is something that is vitally important to understanding Berlioz. Berlioz was a man, a boy, a child that could feel extremes of emotion, feel isolated, feel in love, feel, you know, all these ardent desires, you know, and this is the core of his music, and the core of understanding the Symphonie Fantastique comes from this passion. It's not about thinking, it's about feeling this music. And so Berlioz even as a young boy, you know, he was in love with this 18-year-old girl who lived nearby, and he always was longing and loving and, you know, wanting something that he could not have. And he went on to study medicine for a little while and decided, I don't want to do that. And his father finally said, okay, fine. If you're going to do music, you better be good at it. And so he decided to study music. And you know, he was only 26 years old when the Symphonie Fantastique was premiered. He was greatly influenced by two things, had a profound influence on his life. Number one, Beethoven. Okay, Beethoven. This piece was premiered in 1830. Beethoven had only died 3 years earlier, 1827, Beethoven died. So Beethoven's music was still very fresh, it was still new, it was still exciting. He can, you know, when he heard Beethoven for the first time, it just changed his whole life. And I'm sure you all have had experiences like that, where you see something or read something or whatever it is, something that just impacts you in such a profound way. And that happened when he heard Beethoven. Now the other thing that happened to Berlioz is that he was affected by Shakespeare. And he saw a production of, there were lots of different Shakespeare troupe coming through Paris, and he saw a young woman, Harriet Smithson, in various Shakespeare productions. She played Ophelia, she played Juliet, she played all of these Shakespeare women, and Berlioz would go, and he did not speak English, so he didn't understand the language, but he fell in love with Harriet Smithson. Her gestures and her motions and the way she would deliver and her looks and everything. He was just, you know, my husband, he plays in a country band, and sometimes they talk about, you know, the super fans, you know, the people that, you know, come to every performance and they just are so in love with these artists, and that's what Berlioz was. He was a super fan of Harriet Smithson. He loved her. He was obsessed with her. He could not stop thinking about her. And so he went to all of her performances. He wrote her letters. He just, you know, I mean, borderline, perhaps not what we would think of as perhaps acceptable behavior. I mean, this was a little bit obsessive, very obsessive. And so Berlioz was in love with her. And he came up with the idea, I'm going to write this piece, the Symphonie Fantastique, and it's going to represent my love for Harriet, and I'm the artist, and this artist is in love with this woman, and this is the way I'm going to win her. This is the way I'm going to get her to fall in love with me. And so that is the idea for Symphonie Fantastique. And he says very clearly, this is like an opera without words. You have to know the story, you have to know the program, you have to know what's happening to fully understand what Berlioz was intending to communicate with this music. So in the Symphonie Fantastique, there's 5 movements. And the general story, I'll kind of tell you the general story and then we can talk specifics. The general story is that he is a young artist, like himself, that is obsessively in love with a woman, an object of desire that he does not have. And he represents this woman with the idée fixe, fixed idea. It's a musical melody. And so what happens in the piece is that you hear this melody, this object of desire, this woman that he loves, and it comes back again and again. In every movement, we hear this melody because he's obsessed. And so the woman keeps coming back into his mind, back into his mind, back into his mind. Now, through the course of the story, he becomes so just madly in love with her and obsessed that he decides that he is going to take this opium, this hallucinogenic drug, and that he's going to take a lethal dose of opium to end his life. You know, and what happens is, this is in the story of the piece, that through the process he has all these images and nightmares that come to his mind. So let's talk about each movement and kind of what happens in each movement, because it's a stunning piece. And then we'll talk about the impact of this piece, because it was pretty, lots of different feedback, let's say, at the premiere performance. So the first movement, of course, is the reveries and passions, dreams and passions. And so it is in the first movement that you hear kind of some sighing gestures and this desire, and you hear the fixed idea, the melody. And this idea, I'll just kind of sing it for you. It's and it goes on and on and on and on. And you'll know when it comes. It comes with the violins and the flutes are playing. The flutes are playing along, and there's kind of a percussive, accompanimental thing in the low strings. And it's very, very, I think, apparent when this idea first comes. So this is the woman that he's in love with. He's dreaming of her. He's passionately in love with her. In our second movement, a ball, the artist is imagining that he is at a ball. And so people are waltzing, and this woman that he's in love with is waltzing around, and he's observing her and watching her and maybe trying to get her attention, but a little bit afraid, and just kind of observing this whole thing at this ball. So it's a beautiful, beautiful moment. And again, you'll hear this theme come back again and again. Then our third movement is in the country. And what's stunning about this movement is that it will begin with a dialogue between our English horn, who is on stage, and an oboe that is off in the balcony in the distance. And it's meant to recall being in the countryside, kind of in the vein of like Beethoven Pastoral Symphony, for example. I don't know what we're hearing. And so it's capturing this idea of being in the countryside, maybe perhaps an intimate moment of being with this woman, and just a very kind of lovely, beautiful, beautiful moment. But at the end of this movement, things turn. And you'll notice that the timpani, we have 4 members of our percussion section that come up to the timpani and they'll start playing. It's pretty cool to see 4 guys playing timpani back there. And they are representing the thunder coming in the middle of this beautiful pastoral scene. Dark things are happening. And so we hear the thunder come in these waves at the end of the movement. And this kicks us into the march to the scaffold. Now, the march to the scaffold is at the moment where Berlioz, or the artist in the case of the Symphonie Fantastique, has he's taken the opium and he's in this terrible nightmare, where in this nightmare he has killed the woman that he loves. Now, imagine, he's in love with this woman, he's passionately had this desire for her, and now he has this nightmare that this horrific thing has happened, and that he is being marching towards the guillotine for his death. This is reminiscent of the French Revolution and these things that really did happen in the French Revolution. And so you can hear this kind of march-like rhythm going forward. It starts in the timpani, and you can hear this as the movement unfolds. And the thing to listen for in this movement, there's a moment where everything stops, and only the clarinet is there hovering for a moment, playing the fixed idea, the melodic idea, the idea of the woman, the obsessive woman. And right in this moment, it's as if he's got his head on the guillotine, and he thinks of her for one final moment. We hear it in the clarinet, and then boom, the orchestra comes in, and you hear pizzicatos in the strings that are meant to represent his head. This is good for Halloween, I suppose. His head bouncing off. Okay, this is what Berlioz wanted to demonstrate in the music. And then you hear the triumphant kind of applause, so to speak, from the people that are observing as the brass and the percussion come back in this kind of major key at the end of this moment of the guillotine. So it's very descriptive music. As a student, you know, this is what we study in music history, because there was nothing like this before this piece. Nothing like this before this piece. And, I mean, you can imagine how shocking that was for audiences. And we're almost out of time, so I'm just going to tell you about the last movement and kind of speed to an end here. Now, the last movement, things have gone definitely downhill. Now he is at a moment where the theme, the melodic idea has been transformed into this kind of almost like a witch type of gesture. It's got these trills and it's spooky and it's not beautiful at all. all anymore. And this woman has transformed. We hear the Dies Irae come in the low brass. This is the chant associated with death and the day of wrath and doom and all of this. So this darkness, this imposing kind of darkness comes in the brass. And so we have the combination of the Dies Irae with this theme, this beautiful theme of his love that has been transfixed and transformed. And that is how the piece ends. So it is an unsettling piece. Berlioz broke open all the doors with this piece. Never before had a symphony been composed with this kind of a program to it, with, in 5 movements, with unusual instruments, 4 people playing the timpani at one point, that had never happened, And so this really was kind of out there at the time. And I think it's brilliant for a self-taught composer, only at the age of 26, to make such a profound, lasting impact on music. Harriet Smithson was not at the premiere. He premiered the piece, I guess, did a second performance a few years later, and Harriet did attend the second performance. At this point, her career had kind of gone downhill. She didn't have a lot of money. She kind of needed some help. She came to the second performance. Berlioz, I read something that said that he acted out the real Symphonie Fantastique, and he threatened, I'm going to take this drug if you don't marry me. And so she said, okay. And so they got married, and they really got married. And he, married Harriet. Of course, the marriage was not pleasant at times, and it did not end well, and so they went their separate ways. But he did ultimately realize that passion of the Symphonie Fantastique in this final union that did come to be later in his life. So I encourage you to dig deeper in this piece. It is a stunning piece. It is one of the seminal, most important pieces of music history, and just so important in the scope of what we do. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for being such a great audience, and I hope that you enjoy this colorful program of great music tonight. So thank you, everybody. Thank you.